It started when we inherited a clock from some elderly relatives in Wallasey who died. The clock was delivered. Well, my father remembered the clock from when he was a little boy in the 1930s, and it had always been a great centrepiece. And when these relatives in Wallasey died, the clock was passed down to my father. But when it arrived, it was in very poor condition and it didn't work. So the pair of us set about taking it to pieces, cleaning it and reconstructing it and then making it work. And the clock is now actually in my possession following the death of my father. A lot of the principles behind even modern clocks were first developed in the 17th and 18th century. So you've got names like Robert Hooke, Thomas Tompion, George Graham, who did the very original fundamental work and laid the foundations for a lot of modern horology. And it's quite humbling to see just how clever they were, particularly the mathematicians, at working out how to make a clock work. And what's much more humbling is their ability to measure the accuracy of their own clocks using astronomical observations. When you consider the equipment that was being worked with, the amount of patience and determination that went into completing the original early accurate timepieces it is quite humbling. Well, this is a combination of lots of people's ideas over the past 400 years. This recoil escapement, what it's called, comes from about 1670, 1680, which enables you to have a pendulum moving through a small arc. Previously they had pendulums slightly before them, but they had to move through a much bigger arc because they had a different sort of escapement. There are, I suppose, a number of different levels of thought that go through your mind. One is the immediate one of how am I going to solve or make this exact part, and what processes am I going to go through in order to make it. And the other is perhaps slightly more analytical and trying to work out why a clock has stopped running and what the root causes are. And that's really a process of elimination inspired by bits of experience and knowing what has and hasn't worked in the past and what problems I've encountered in the past. And it can be quite interesting trying to find out and figure out ways of making parts, because for about 98% of what I repair there are no spare parts available. You have to make your own, and very often you have to actually design it from scratch, particularly if large numbers of parts are missing. You have to try and reconstruct what originally happened, design and make the parts, for which I use a full range of modern equipment, computer-aided design, and then using milling machines and lathes I'm able to make the parts I need. I think these days people have very little idea of how mechanical clocks work, and they've not usually been brought up with them, although a lot of what I get is sentimental, where people want something repairing because they remember it working. But in general, people don't properly lubricate or set up or understand how to set up a mechanical clock. So they come to me sometimes in very poor condition, where perhaps they've not been lubricated for many years and they've been put in a very unsuitable position, so they dry out. And of course mankind is always very good at applying brute force to a problem, so you find a considerable amount of abuse just from physically mishandling and being rather aggressive to the clock when it doesn't run. You can see what happens in the tank if you want. Normally put the lid on, but fascinating sound. Makes microscopic bubbles that explode in the fluid. I like to see that I've actually done something. I've always liked making things in every other job that I've had, and this can be very satisfying when you start off with a mechanism that perhaps hasn't run for 150 years. You're able to rebuild it and then set it to run again as its original maker intended it to work. And it is of itself very satisfying to go from something that doesn't work into something that does. And what's nice is the range of different clocks that I get, from the very modern mechanical clocks, quartz clocks, right back to clocks made in the early 18th century, which were very much handmade, and there's a considerable variation in design, although they do have fundamentally many of the same parts. And once you understand the principle behind one, you're able to apply it to others.